Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Terry White, Worldwide Photography Evangelist here at Adobe. It's my pleasure to be streaming to you live once again on my favorite day of the week, which is Friday because it's Masterclass Friday. For those of you who are new or first timers and basically you tuned in to see what's going on, a couple housekeeping rules, then we'll dive right in. So first and foremost, I see William and Amando over on YouTube, and I'm sure people are tuning in from Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and that's great if you're hanging out in those places. But I also see people on the Adobe Live chat, which is where we will be paying the bulk of the attention. So if I missed your question, if I don't see you because you're on one of the other channels, it's because I'm primarily paying attention to the Adobe Live chat. So if you want to head over to Adobe Live, it's b.net/Adobe Live. You can log in with your Adobe ID, which is free to create. And then I will see you with people like Michael, Bobby, Mary Brown, Wade, Axel, Ian, Clifton, Ozzy, Ashfro, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, Ruth, Victoria, and Chris. So if you guys are want to hang out with those cool people over in the Adobe Live chat, head over to b.net/Adobe Live. So Kevin's in on Facebook, and Ali Shabir, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, I'm probably messing it up, is over on Facebook as well. You guys can hang out where you are. You can watch it wherever you feel comfortable. But again, if you want to hang out in the main chat, b.net/Adobe Live. Also, I want to thank the people in the future who are watching the replay. I love replay numbers just as much as I love live numbers. And it's just great that you guys watch it whenever you can. All right, so what's today's topic? Let's get to it. Today we're going to be doing the top 10 most common photo fixes. In other words, the top 10 things that you should look at when it comes to making adjustments, corrections, or fixes to your photos. I don't really like to use the word fix because that means the photo's broken. And usually broken photos mean that they might not be good. So let's not say they're broken, but let's say they need some love. They need some adjusting. They need some retouching. And all of those terms are fine. But broken photos probably are not great photos to start off with. In other words, it's hard to make a bad photo good, but it's great. It's easy to make a good photo better or a great photo better. All right. So with that in mind, also, I don't want you guys to get caught up in the techniques. Like I'm going to show you the ways that I do it quickly. These aren't the only ways I do it. You know, as in most cases, especially in Photoshop, you can do things 50 different ways. And if you look at it and say, well, I like my technique better, then do your technique. This is not a you have to do it this way. I'm mainly pointing out the 10 things you should look for and showing you how I would address them. If you have a better way of addressing them that works for you, by all means, do it your way. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. Hopefully, I got some bonus things that if I run out of content, I've got more things to show, and I'll hopefully get through the 10 within the next 50 minutes. I'm looking at my timer there, and we should be able to get through all 10 in 50 minutes. That's 5 minutes per, so that should work. All right, so let's get to it. I'm going to switch over to my desktop, and I'm going to be doing Lightroom and Photoshop, Lightroom Classic and Photoshop. Everything I'm doing in Lightroom Classic, if you're a Lightroom user, you can do it in Lightroom. I'm not showing something that only works in Lightroom Classic. So whether you're using Lightroom Classic or Lightroom, the technique should work. Okay, and again, in no particular order, my 10 things are, first one, bad or inadequate lighting, which also means the photo could be backlit. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that we have a couple examples here. We have 3 examples here, actually. Let's take a look at this. This is just that midday, harsh, bad lighting. The background's washed out. She's kind of washed out as well because it was taken in the worst possible time of day, that high noon to 2 o'clock sun, which means you should probably not even be outside with a camera. All right. So photo's not broken. It just needs some adjustments. Now, it can be salvaged because it was shot in RAW. there's enough data there to make the adjustments so the sun is not too bad. But again, if I were putting this up against a photo shot at the right time of day, it would need less and it would probably end up looking better. So this is kind of one of those okay or good photos that can be better as opposed to a great photo that could be better, because if it were shot a little bit later in the day or earlier in the day, could have been a better photo. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's go to the develop module. In Lightroom, you choose edit. And let's do the things I always do. So let's do profile correction. Let's switch it to portrait. Not going to be a very minor, if anything, noticeable difference. Let's go to lens corrections. Let's enable the profile correction. And that even made it brighter, but that also corrected some of the bowing in the image. So it did that. All right, next, let's go back to basic. And I'm going to let Lightroom have a crack at adjusting it based on its AI and based on what it thinks it should do. And I always do an auto tone, because auto tone, even if I don't agree with auto tone and everything it does, which I rarely ever like click auto tone and say done, I always usually tweak at least a couple of the sliders, because it either over adjusted something or under adjusted something, and I could just tweak it. Then you might say, well, why don't you just do it manually? I hate auto stuff. Just you drag all the sliders the way you want, because that takes more time. In other words, it's going to get most of the things right. It just may not get a couple of the things right. So I'd rather fix 1, 2, or 3 sliders as opposed to having to adjust every single slider myself. If you prefer to do it all yourself, never click auto. Do it all yourself. All right, so let's click auto. And there we go. That's what I mean by like it's already made a significant improvement. It's not done, but it's certainly better than it was a second ago. All right, so now what don't I agree with? So that's what I do. I normally click auto and say, okay, where did it not do some things I would have done differently? Well, first and foremost, auto does not touch the presence sliders for texture, clarity, and dehaze. It did adjust vibrance and saturation, and I may not agree with those either. So first and foremost, before I even worry about going back and adjusting what it did do, I want to go in and say, well, this photo was taken in the middle of the day. It most likely needs some dehaze. So just adding a little dehaze kind of gets me in the ballpark of where I want to be without doing a whole lot more to the other sliders. That's a night and day difference. That was before, that's after, just with a couple of clicks to turn that photo into something that's actually usable. And a lot of times we get caught up in, well, it came out of the camera, I composed it perfectly, I had my settings set perfectly, and boom, there it is. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's good. Just because you technically got it correct and you did all the right things in the camera doesn't mean it can't be better. That's why we do post-production in the first place. All right, so I got my dehaze up a little bit more. Now, I might then go play with, like I might bring the highlights down a little bit more, maybe a lot more. I might go in and just bring the exposure down just a little bit more. There we go. And this is me tweaking what auto did. I'm kind of okay with the shadows. Let's see if I like it anymore. And I might also increase the contrast a little bit more. Maybe not. Maybe something like that. Okay, I'm getting a shadow clipping warning, but it's not on anything that I care about. And that's my quick before and after on that shot at the wrong time of day photo. Okay, next up. Here's one that was shot, this is what I mean by backlit, where the sun, the camera paid attention more to the sun than the subject. That's me, by the way, on the beach, posing for a selfie. Anyway, this happens all the time, and you might be wondering, like, why is this happening still in 2022? It's because your eye is still 1,000,000 times better than your camera. I don't care what kind of camera you have. Your eye is still better. If you were standing behind me on the beach looking at me, I wouldn't look like a silhouette to your eye. You'd see the color in my shirt, my shorts, so forth and so on. You would see me and you would see the bright sun. Your eye automatically adjusts, no problem. it would be able to see and distinguish the differences. But still, cameras, for the most part, even unless you have a camera that you can, like, maybe you can make it better with HDR in the camera and it will give you a better exposure. But for the most part, it's going to, you're going to hold it up to your eye, especially with a DSLR, and you're going to see what your eye sees. And your eye is going to say, yep, that looks good. And you're going to click, and then you're going to get back to your computer. It's going to be this. Because even though you're looking through the lens, you're still using your eye to do that. And that's why a DSLR, that's one of the big differences between a DSLR and a mirrorless. Because the DSLR is, you're just looking through the lens and you're seeing what your eye normally would see if you didn't look through the camera. But the camera's still seeing something different. All right, so how would I fix this? Let's go to develop. And the problem with this, if I adjust myself, meaning if I make myself, like you can see my color of my shirt and all that, then chances are I'm going to overexpose the background. The background's pretty washed out as it is. So I don't want to make the background any brighter. I just want to adjust me. That's why the masking is great in Lightroom now for this kind of purpose. So I'm going to go to the masking tab, the little circle there, it looks like a mask. I'm going to go to that little circle. I'm going to go to select subject, and that will automatically select me. Great. One of the best things that happened last year in Lightroom. Or was it earlier this year? Last year in Lightroom. And then I'm going to just bump up the shadows, because that's what the problem is. I'm in the shadows. So as soon as I start bumping up the shadows, look, I'm coming out. There you go. You can see the color of my red shirt. Before, you couldn't even tell what color that shirt was. Now you can actually start to see the red shirt. The only problem with doing this is if you push the shadows too far, you start losing contrast. So, except for that, let's go ahead and go into contrast and bump up the contrast a little bit more to bring the contrast back to where it should be. Great. Now I can focus on the background. So I can do all the things to the background without affecting me to get the background looking the way I want. How do I do that? I create another mask. So let's go create another mask. The easiest thing to select is the subject. So let's select subject. Well, wait, you already have a subject selected. Why did you do it again? Because now I can go ahead and click invert. And invert is different in every place. I don't know why. Lightroom, Photoshop team, Camera Raw team, like, make it all the same. In Lightroom Classic, it's a checkbox. In Lightroom on mobile, it's an icon. I think in Lightroom desktop, it's an icon as well. And in Camera Raw, I can't remember what it is. So it's always a little different, but you'll see invert or you'll see an icon that looks like an invert. So now when I click invert, now the background's selected. So I can do anything I want to the background now. So, and yes, you can rename the masks. So let's go in and let's see, let's bring down that exposure a little bit. There we go. Let's add a little dehaze to the background. Dehaze, there we go. And again, none of this is impacting me because I'm a different mask. I'm not selected right now. And I can even adjust the temperature if it's a little too blue. Someone said that. I can make it a little warmer. There we go. And now we get that sunrise the way I want. So we, just for the sake of naming, this is mask 2. This is the background. And mask 1 is me, TW. All right, so I can go back to the TW mask and I can say, oh, well, now that I've done that, I can bring the exposure down to me just a little bit. There we go. And there you go. So you get your image. You get your image the way you want. Oh, great point. Someone brought this up. And this is something I was going to attack a little bit later, but thanks for bringing it up. We'll do it now. Once, is it Janina? I'm messing your name up, but whoever said this, crooked horizon. It's one of the things that I always show you guys is like, once you see a bat or a horizon is leaning one way or the other, you can't unsee it. And I have this as an example. It's one of the 10 things that's just coming up later, but it is also in this photo. So let's fix it here too. Let's go to the crop tool while we're here. And you have an angle tool. And the angle tool is like, it's just when you see it, you can't unsee it. You can drag the angle tool along the horizon that should be straight and then just let go. And then I'll take care of it. So thank you for pointing that out in this photo. It makes that photo a little bit better. And there are other things we can nitpick and tweak in this photo, but this is, again, we're still on number one, bad or inadequate lighting. All right, let's move on. Number two. Number two, white balance. So the white balance can be off, and it can be off just a little to the point to where you don't really notice it right away. When it's usually off, it means your photo's usually too warm. In this case, it's too warm, or it's too blue. And how you know that it's off at a glance without even checking like the software is you see things that should be white or should be a color or should be black, and they're not. Like her dress is black, obviously, but it's like got a little bit of beige in it because of the too warm nature of this. That sun is whiting out this wall here. And I can't remember if this side wall was white or not, but it probably was. And yes, the photo's a little crooked too. We could adjust for that. But how can I just check the white balance in this photo? So let's go to develop. One of my favorite things, and I do this even in Photoshop with the camera raw filter, because Photoshop even doesn't have the best white balance fixes except for camera raw. So the camera raw filter in Photoshop or in Lightroom, I click this little eyedropper, and as I hover over different parts in the photo, you can see it make the adjustments based on if you were to click right there. So in the upper left corner, and this is different in Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic has this preview window in the upper left corner that Lightroom does not. So that is one difference. But if I hover over where this is being all washed out, I can see that it's toning down that warmness a little, and that's about where it should be. If I do it there, that's too cool. If I do it on her dress, that's probably okay. And there's no other place that, like the wall is beige. I can try this little border here. This border should be white. Actually, this would be a great place to click, because that little trim at the floor should be white. So if it's not white, this will adjust it. So let's click on that, because this, I can't remember if this should be white or not, but this definitely should. So let's click there, and that will make that adjustment for you. Now keep in mind that a temperature adjustment is subjective. So you may look at that and say, well, it kind of cooled it off a little too much. I actually prefer it to be a little warmer. No problem. It's your choice. It's your photo. If you think it should be a little warmer, then you can drag the temperature slider just a little bit warmer. Because I do think it cooled it off too much, and therefore that's about right. Now, same thing if I thought this image was crooked, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now, like I see this wall is like this little seam here coming down. That looks straight. This is the one that looks crooked. If I were to adjust this one, the photo looks crooked too. If I were to adjust this one, this could be a perspective issue as well, which we're also going to take a look at. Yeah, I can live with that. All right. So there we go. Straighten it up too. So just keep in mind that, you know, lines in your, like, but then that photo looks crooked now. So again, you could use perspective. You could use here. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's undo it. Let's use transform, and let's use a guided upright, because I know auto won't do what I want. So I'm going to say, well, this line should be straight, and this line should be straight, because you need at least two. And see, it's kind of straightening up both of those lines. It made the photo a little taller, and also left some white space here, which I would have to then either crop or zoom the photo up to adjust for. Let's try a zoom, see if that will work. A scale, I mean. Scale that up. And yep, it's going to crop off too much of her feet if I do that. So let's not do that. Let's just go in and crop off the sides. There we go. All right. That's straight, and again, makes her look a little taller, so I'm okay with that too. Okay, next up, let's go in. And here's another white balance example. In this case, I was planning for it. So whenever you see one of my shots with the person holding one of these targets, that was designed to fix the white balance in the software. So it's like you're going to do a portrait session or a session of any kind, and you take the first shot with one of these in the shot. Then you can put it away and keep shooting under those lighting conditions, because Now that you have one target in your shoot of hundreds and hundreds of images, you could select all those images, go to the first one with the target in it, go to the develop module, and then click the white balance, and then click on the gray, the middle gray strip of that target, and that will adjust the white balance. Because remember like you were there, her dress should be silver, and it wasn't. So that was a dead giveaway that the white balance is off. Let's go back. See how her dress is kind of beige? Her dress is actually silver. So when I click the white balance adjustment, that's actually fixing the white balance in this shot so that her dress is the right color. So that's why white balance is a huge number 2, because if the white balance is off, even just a little, it's making things the wrong color in your photos. And again, the skin tone looks a little washed out to me. I might go in and just select her and maybe adjust to make her a little warmer, but the dress is now the right color. So it's all subjective, but that's a great way to fix it. Okay. Can she walk in those high heels? Yes, she can, and she did. Okay, next up. So here's another, this is a big perspective image issue. So I don't remember what lens I shot this with, but it was either a wide angle or fisheye. Let's go, probably a wide angle. Let's go look. Lens corrections. Yep, it was a 14 to 24 millimeter wide angle lens. So huge perspective distortions here. Those buildings look like they're going to fall over on each other, but that's what you get with depending on the lens and the angle you shoot it at. So we go to transform, and once again, we could do auto, but I'm just going to do guided because I know I want this building straight, and I know I want this building straight. And I usually choose the outer extremes. There we go. Now, this also teaches you a lesson that in order to get, if you don't have content aware, or at least you don't have in Lightroom, so you can't fill that in. And it may not even do a great job even if you did have content because of all the little stuff that it would have to use. Then you want to make sure you're far enough back so that when you crop this image or zoom into this image, let's do a crop, you're not cutting out things that are important. So in other words, I'm shooting the West Peachtree Tower, the Westin downtown, and that's the main purpose of the shot. So I got it, and everything around it is straight. If those buildings on the side matter, then you need to be back further so that when you adjust this or fix this, that those buildings will still be included. Okay, so that's a perspective and lens correction, which is number 3. All right, number 4 is a subtle one. And by the way, I have some other, oh, here's another fun one here. This one's kind of just looking all kind of warped. Let's do one more lens correction, then we'll move on. Develop. I took the shot in Amsterdam. And let's guide it. Same thing here. I'm going to pick a spot on this side that should be straight, that's not. And then I'm going to just pick the edge of this building here, which is not too bad, but it'll just give it something to base off of. And there we go. All right, so again, we can scale or we can crop. There we go. And that's upright. So I could probably tweak it one more time, like on this line, but I think this is okay. So when you have one of these kind of crazy looking warped buildings or warped areas, guided upright is going to be your friend. And you can do up to 4 guides. So you have to do at least 2. You can do 3, you can do 4. And if your photo needs more than 4, you got a bigger problem. All right, so let's move on. So the subtle problem, which is number 1, 2, 3, 4, is called highlight recovery. When you click on a photo and you look at the histogram in the develop module, and you see these little white triangles, or you see these triangles and they're not gray. Let's put it that way. They may not be white, they may be yellow, they may be red, they may be blue, they may be white. But if they're not gray, meaning if they're not dim, that means you've got an issue either in your shadows, your highlights, or both. So highlight clipping is a usual problem when the lighting's off. And so you may look at this photo and say it looks fine. Like, I don't see a problem. But when you hover over one of these triangles, it will show you either in red or blue. So let's focus on his shirt. Let's go to my zoom tool. And there we go. Let's hover on his shirt. All those little red spots are completely blown out, meaning there's no detail and no spots whatsoever. They're completely white, like there's no little fine linen lines or anything, completely blown out. Now, no one's really going to notice it in this shirt because it's only in those 4 or 5 6 little spots. But if you had a big area that was important to your photo where you're getting this red, that means that part of the photo is completely gone. So if there's enough detail left, you can recover the highlights. If there's and by the way, you're never going to recover the highlights in things that don't have any detail, like the sun. You can pull your highlight slider all the way over. It's not going to do a thing. A reflection in a car bumper. Again, the sun, a bright light, a white background where it was completely blown out by the backlight. Probably not going to recover a lot of detail in those areas. And again, those areas probably don't matter. But on someone's clothing, face, or whatever subject you're shooting, if it's in the subject and it's not a specular highlight or reflection, then it's important that you recover it. All right, and again, if it's in an area that matters. So let's look at the shadow recovery. So I'm not seeing it here. Let's maybe zoom out. Okay, see where the shadow recovery is? For those of you who can't see it or didn't notice it, it's all the way in the lower left-hand corner in this area here. I could care less. That's what I mean by it. If it's in an important area, fix it. If it's not in an important area, then don't worry about it. You can still fix it, but it's not as big of an issue. So down here, the shadow area is completely black, completely filled in, no detail whatsoever. Who cares? Like, that's just, well, I shouldn't say who cares. You might care. I don't. So that one I'd probably let go, but I'll show you how to fix them both. Now, luckily in the histogram, underneath these triangles, this whole histogram is really a series of sliders. It goes from blacks to shadows to exposure, a big exposure in the middle, and to highlights and to whites. So it's got all of these areas. And as I hover over each one, it's showing me, let me zoom in so you can see it. It's showing me in the lower left-hand corner what I'm hovering over. So that's blacks, shadows, exposure, and then if I kept going over there, highlights, and I'm off screen. But anyway, it would be whites. It would be the next thing. Okay, there we go. So if I hover under the triangle, I'm in the whites area of the photo, and I just drag to the left to pull back the whites. Let me show you in basic. The whites slider. And now the triangle is gray. So now if I hover over that triangle, nothing turns red because I pull the whites down enough to bring back the detail in that blown out area. So his shirt now has detail in that area, in those spots. So if I were to zoom in, there's detail in these spots now. I don't have to worry about them being completely blown out. Whereas before, you can kind of see where they're going to be, like this area is going to be completely blown out. So again, I just pull back in that area till that triangle goes gray, or as close as it can. In this case, still could go a little further. Well, still see they got 2 little spots there. Okay, I don't care because they're not enough to even broadcast the warning. Okay, so next, I could, if I cared, fix the blacks going the other way. Now, again, it's not just adjusting that little lower corner, it's adjusting everything. So I pulled it all the way over, and it's still going to be a warning in that area. Well, actually, it got rid of most of it. But it's still white, so that means there's still a taste of it left. Don't care. And if that negatively impacted the rest of the photo, I may pull it back anyway and say, that area didn't matter, and I don't like what it's doing to the rest of the photo, so I don't need to make that adjustment. So highlight recovery is number 4. Number 5. This goes to this one. And this is a photo we took. You've seen this photo a couple weeks in a row now, or these photos in a couple weeks in a row. We took them a few weeks back in a masterclass where we're doing a live shoot. We had Chandra in studio. We did the shot. Number 5 is bad composition. Bad composition is where the photo's just not composed as well as it could be. And what we mean by that is, like, we normally don't put things dead center in the photograph unless you're trying to do it. Like you have a reason for doing it. Like, because everything in photography, if it's a rule, it can be broken as long as you know why you're breaking it. So in other words, I could say never put things in the middle of the photo, but that's not accurate because sometimes there's a reason to. So in most cases we don't, but that doesn't mean you can't. So in this case, there's no good reason to have her in the center of the photo. So to recompose it, the only thing left we could do is either one of two things. We could crop it, or we could take it into Photoshop and add more background to it. We could recompose it there. So for example, let's see if I have this shot to recompose in Photoshop. Okay, we're in Photoshop now. Okay, well, first and foremost, if I go back to Lightroom, if I didn't want to go to Photoshop to recompose it, I would just crop it differently. I would do something like that to where simply she's not in the middle of the photo. But also then the photo is kind of a different size, different dimensions. So that could work, but that's not what I want. Oh, one too many. Let's go back to her set. And so in Photoshop, I have the advantage of a content-aware crop tool. So if I go to crop, and I turn on content aware, which is a checkbox in the top here, then I can crop and regain or use content aware fill to fill in the background if I need to. So I want to do the same thing where I could pull the photo over, but instead, yeah, I'm going to pull it over. All right, pull it over, but I still want more of the photo on this side. So that would be a good composition. But the problem is we end up with that white space. So if I just say, go ahead and do it, it will calculate for a second. Don't worry, it's just hasn't redrawn the screen yet. And once it's done calculating, it used the background to fill in that area automatically. Now, of course, that only works if you know, the background can be easily duplicated and makes sense. If there was a person there or whatever, and it would bring over half the, you know, in other words, the background that it's bringing over has to be okay. So in this case, it doesn't have to be a solid color, but it has to make sense when it replicates it over. All right, so now that's better composition. I even like the fact that this side is darker because it just draws your eye back over to her. And you know, I again remove some of these distractions, which is another category, these little wrinkles here. But that's an example of composition and adjusting the composition. Now, from you're taking the picture aspect. Someone even mentioned it during the stream. Is it okay that you're cutting off her head? Yeah, if I'm doing it on purpose. So back to it's okay to do that if you know why you're doing it. But if you're going to do something, if you're going to cut something off or tilt something or make it crooked or whatever, don't make it look like an accident. Make it look like you did it on purpose. So in other words, I didn't cut her head completely off to where like it doesn't make sense to do it. And I didn't cut just a little bit off because then that would look like an accident. It's just enough because I did it that way on purpose. The biggest problem I have is I get in a hurry when I'm shooting and I'm not looking at the full edge of the frame. And one of my pet peeves with my own photography is I sometimes, and I of course have to correct it, is I might cut off fingers that are too close to the edge of the photo. And then I see it and I was like, okay, let me back up a little bit and make sure the hands and feet and toes and everything are in. So you don't want to amputate any limbs, fingers, things that like there are different spots where like her arms are obviously cut off in this photo because that's where the photo ends. But it doesn't look like an accident. It doesn't look like you cut off just this much of her fingers and now that looks bad. If the whole, like this whole area is gone, that's okay because that's where the photo ends. So just keep in mind, because those are things that aren't easy to fix. If just the tips of the fingers are cut off in the photo because they were right on the edge, that's hard as heck to make that look right. So you either got to crop in more to cut off more, or you're going to spend a lot of time trying to find fingers and Photoshop them back on. So it's best when you're shooting subjects to make sure if anything's being cut off, you intended it to be cut off. If it's being cut off by accident, fix it while you're in camera, because it's a whole lot harder to fix it in post. Okay. We can close this, save it. And did I close it? Yeah, I did. Okay, let's go back. All right, so that was bad composition. All right, next let's head over, and by the way, this is the new one because it brought over a copy. So here was our original. Dead center in the photo. There's a better composed image where she's off to one side. Okay, next up, let's go in and, hey Dana, thanks, glad you liked the tip. Let's go in and talk about our next one, which is unnecessary bulges and wrinkles. All right, so not this one. This is a bonus photo if I have time. I've used this photo before of this is not my image, it's Adobe stock. Someone's grandmother, most likely. And what I mean by unnecessary bulges and wrinkles, if you look at her stature from her shoulders out. Well, the hand on this side that's coming up has this unnecessary bulge sticking out of it. It's just the sweater's too big, or just sticking out, whatever it is. That's what I mean by unnecessary. Like her other side looks normal. This side looks too far extended. So the way we fix things like that is in Photoshop with Liquify. So we could, first of all, just so we don't make a mistake and regret it, we can go to Convert for Smart Filters. That'll turn that into a smart object, so we make it non-destructible. And then we can go into our filter menu and come down to Liquify. All right, now that we're in, Liquify's over there. Let's bring Liquify over. There we go. Now that we're in Liquify, your first tool is the warp tool, and that's the one you're already on by default. You just need to make it the right size. The other thing you need to check before you, if you're a first-time Liquify user, or even you've used it before, you just want to make sure this is turned on. You want to make sure that pin edges is turned on, because what that will prevent you from accidentally doing, here, let me turn it off. That'll do is prevent you from accidentally pulling in the edges of your photo. And what it is like, obviously we'd see that one, but you'll be close to the edge, or like the bottom of her sleeve, and you'll pull it in just a little bit. You wouldn't notice it right away, but everyone else will. So that's a dead giveaway that you liquefied something because the edges got pulled in. So let me undo that. Let me turn on pin edges. And now, even if I'm purposely trying to drag up from the bottom, nothing's happening. Or from the corners, nothing's happening. Because pin edges prevent you from pulling in the edges of your photo. All right, now that we got that turned on, our safety turned on, the next thing we want to do is we want to make our brush as big as the area we want to push. Normally, I always recommend working smaller brush sizes for most things. This is an example where a bigger brush is better. So I'm just going to hit my right bracket key to make my brush bigger. And again, that's about the size of that bulge in her sleeve that I want to push over. I'm just going to pick it up and push the whole thing in. There we go. All right, now this was easy because she's on a solid background. When the background is not solid, you have to be more careful, and you might have to do more work to make it look like you didn't do it. In other words, you never want to make it look like you liquefied on purpose. Okay, so if I click OK on this one, it's a smart filter, so I can always go back in it, but this is before, that's the after, just a little tweak. And I see some little shadowing there, so I might go in and kind of fix this little shadowing that introduced, or I might have introduced that when I was trying to pull up the examples from the pin edges. But anyway, make sure that's taken care of. But anyway, so that was just a quick fix minus the shadows. All right, so now let's go to one that's not so easy. So we got Super Dad here, and Super Dad a little self-conscious about his pandemic stomach. So we want to, and aren't we all? And we want to go in And the problem with fixing this one is that if we zoom in, you have a pattern on the wall, and you have this line in this crease in the wall. And if you liquify, that pattern's going to get stretched. You can't avoid it, because as long as the pattern's next to the area you want to liquify, it's going to get stretched. You can try and mask it, but it's going to get stretched. So just be conscious of that you're going to have to fix that when you're done liquefying, because it will be obvious that you did it. All right, so let's zoom out. Let's go into filter, convert for smart filters. There we go. So now it'll be non-destructive. Let's go into liquify. Now, by the way, just as a beginner Photoshop tip, if you see the thing you want to use at the top, don't pick that one. You want to go down to where liquify normally is, because all this one is saying do it again. So it'll do the last liquify you did with the sleeve. That is irrelevant to this one. So this just, and the filter that you want is at the very top. That just means run the filter again the last way you did it for an image that's like the one you did last. This is not like that one. So we want to go back to liquify and start from scratch. Okay, so liquify is up, pin edges is on. Our brush is too big. We're gonna make our brush smaller, and we're gonna zoom in. And we want to make sure that line doesn't get crooked either. So might make our brush a little bit smaller, at least for this first part. Actually, no, let's go back bigger. Let's do this part first. Oh, before we even do any of that, let's freeze the, you have a tool called Freeze Mask Tool. So what this allows you to do is kind of freeze the areas that you don't want to move. Now again, because you're pushing in, you're going to end up with some stuff moving anyway. There's like, you're going to end up with some stretched pixels because of the nature of this adjustment. But this will prevent you from stretching other things you don't want to stretch. Like maybe I don't want that to move, I want that to move, so forth and so on. Okay, you can paint this all day long. It's not going to affect the look of the image. Now we go back to our warp tool, and then we go ahead and start warping it. But see what I mean? It's even stretching the pixels underneath because it has no choice. We're going in that direction. So we don't want to go up, we don't want to go down. We want to keep it in a straight line, straight as we can, and go that way with it. All right, and his dad bod is preserved. But we're going to have some stretch pixels that we have to contend with, and that's okay. Okay, so now, there we go. We took care of his self-consciousness, and here are our stretch pixels that made it look like we did what we did. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a duplicate of this layer. We're going to create a duplicate. Hang on, trying to do a shortcut here. That is not working. All right, let's, first of all, where's the bottom of my layers panel? There it is. And let's duplicate it this way. All right, and let's go ahead and we're going to there we go. All right, so we have our original that we can always go back to. Now we have this new one that needs to fix the stretching. And we're just going to fix the stretching the way we would any other blemishes. So we're going to use our patch tool and kind of just simply get a nice area of that stretching and just pull it over. Don't mess up the line. There we go. And we're just kind of going to blend that in so that we can't immediately see where we did it. Now, hold on, this might require a stylus. You could use the clone stamp tool as well if that's what you're more comfortable with. Got some stretch pixels down here as well. There we go. So in other words, we just don't want it to be a dead giveaway. Hey, you liquefy that spot, we can tell. All right. Go in and clean up as much as you want, but that would be the way we could take care of that. Would you flatten the image first? Not if I wanted to preserve the ability to go back to the liquefy. So Now I still have the liquefied version. Oh, there we go. I have the liquefied version to go back to. I can always go back to the original. I would probably flatten it first, but people get mad when I say that. So, but I have to teach you the ways that will protect you in case you mess up and want to go back. All right, so let's go in, and now I'm going to skip over that one for the sake of time. Let's go to this next one. So we did unnecessary bulges and wrinkles. Let's go to fixing, and we got to move a little faster here. We're going to go to number 7, I think it is, 6, 7. Broken or missing teeth. So this common problem, people don't like their portrait to look like, you know, hey, my tooth was missing. I got it fixed later. I like this picture, but I don't like my tooth is missing. So we're going to go to our object selection tool. We're going to select a good tooth as opposed to a bad tooth. And now that we got that good tooth selected, we're just going to hit Command J on Mac, PC Control J to duplicate it onto its own layer. Now that we've got it on its own layer, we're going to free transform it. So let's actually pick it up with a move. Oh, sorry. That was my bad for switching tools. All right, we're going to use the move tool, move it over. And obviously it's not an exact fit because the other tooth was a little longer, a little bigger, so forth and so on. So this is great. Use free transform and use the warp feature, because the warp feature will let you warp the tooth down a little bit and up a little bit. And there we go. We get kind of a perfect fit with that tooth. And it doesn't look exactly like the other tooth because probably no two teeth are exactly the same. Now I do notice a little shadowing here because one tooth was in an area that the other tooth was not. Also looks like I may have overlapped that tooth a little bit. So I might go back to warp one more time and pull in. There you go. Maybe not that much. Maybe something like that. And then remember, you still got the other tooth under it. Most of it's still there. So let's go ahead and use the mask feature. We'll create a mask. We'll go to our brush and we'll go to a black brush and we'll just kind of mask off the part of this tooth that we don't need, because we still got the good tooth underneath. And by the way, we want a softer brush so it blends in better. There we go. And there you go. So before, after. He's got a new tooth and he's happy. All right, next up. Number 8. Number 8. Number 8 is the most common one. We do this all the time. And that's fixing blemishes and fixing wrinkles and fixing skin smoothing and whatever. And this is kind of one of those, it depends on your subject. Like this doesn't bother me. Like he doesn't have a bad skin issue that like needs to be corrected. Some people are more sensitive to their blemishes, freckles, moles, whatever it is than others. It really depends on the person. So it really depends on you and your subject. So just going to show you what I would do in this case and then show you a skin smoothing technique that if you wanted to apply it, you could. All right, so first and foremost, just simply create just a new layer, new empty layer, so that way all the retouching will happen on that layer. We're going to switch over to our spot healing brush, and we're going to make sure the checkbox is checked for sample all layers at the top. All right, so now, because I've set sample all layers, even though I'm on a blank layer, it will sample the layer below and apply the retouch to the blank layer. So I can just go ahead and just kind of click through some of these. I wouldn't remove them all because he's not 10 years old. You know, he's an adult. So removing them all would probably be suspect for people that normally are used to seeing them and they're used to seeing some stuff up there. They're just not used to seeing it all. Okay, great. So remove a little bit of this and away you go. All right, I think that's a fair amount. You know, again, you keep adjusting to taste. So because we did this on a new layer, we can always dial the layer down. We can always, oh, it looks like we did a lot, but yeah. Anyway, if you want to remove something, do what I just did. If you want to make it more subtle, so it's still there, but doesn't show as much, then you can, on the layer that you retouched onto, you can just lower the opacity. So you can dial it back in so it's just not as strong. So for example, someone might have a mole that you don't want the mole to stand out. Maybe they do, but you don't, or they don't. And then you could just remove it, but then bring it back so it's not as strong. It's just subtle. So techniques like that. All right, next up, I created a merge layer of the two. So let's work with the merge. This is the merge retouch layer. So this is a skin smoothing technique called high pass. So let's go into, I'll show you how to do this manually. So we're going to duplicate that layer. We're going to then run the high pass filter on it. Other high pass. So high pass is used for sharpening and it's used for smoothing. Just depends on which way you use it. Now, when you're all the way over, you just have a gray panel. When you're all the way over to the right, you see your subject. Where you want to be is somewhere in the middle to where you can barely start to see the subject come through the gray. So, because the more you do it to the right, the more it's going to do. So if you do it too much to the right and you say it's too strong, then start over and don't pull the slider so far to the right. I'd say right about there is where I want to be. So click OK. That might still be too much. Now we're going to set this blend mode of this layer to overlay. And overlay, as you can see, is making everything sharp. Like that high pass made everything sharper. We want the opposite. So we go to that high pass layer, you can name it that. Let's just call it high pass. And on that high pass layer, you just hit Command I or PC Control I, and that will invert it. So inverting the high pass layer makes it a skin smoothing layer as opposed to a sharpening layer. Now, we don't want everything sharp because that's the whole face. Everything is, so it basically makes the whole face look blurry. So we're just going to go ahead and add a layer mask that hides the whole thing. Holding down our Option or Alt key, click the layer mask icon. That will hide the whole thing. Then you can go to a brush with white paint and make your brush bigger. And then you can just brush in where you want the smoothing to take place. I'm just giving you an example here. He does not need skin smoothing. And even if that's too much, which it is in this case, like that's too much smoothing for my taste right here in this area, keep in mind that's a layer, so you can always lower the opacity of it. So that's too much. Let's dial down the opacity. So where it's just a little bit of skin smoothing, not 100%. So techniques for skin smoothing, removing blemishes was number 8. Number 9, distractions and crooked photos. So we already handled crooked. We know how to do that. Let's go to beach. So crooked in Lightroom or in Photoshop would be the crop tool. And you have a straighten tool on the control panel at the top here. So we're just going to drag the straighten tool along the edge there. That should go ahead and apply our straightening. And then we're just going to go ahead and remove things that are distractions. So you could use your patch tool, patch out this tripod that shouldn't be in the shot anymore. And I missed an edge of it. There we go. This reflector or whatever this is on the ground. And then you got these, the sign here. This probably the sign as a distraction. So basically removing things that take away from the subject. Even though they were technically there when you took the shot, if they're not adding to the story, they're taking away from the story. So if they don't need, and that's a bad one, but anyway, do it better. Anyway, if they don't need to be there, they don't need to be there. All right, last one, number 10, is correcting skin tones. I'm going to go back to Lightroom Classic. Here's one where it's a backlit photo. Let's go into Develop, and let's go ahead and do the things I would normally do. Not Adobe Color, let's do Adobe Portrait. Let's do a masking. Well, let's do an auto tone first, then a masking, select subject, And I got 1 minute left. Maybe adjust the exposure of her and maybe adjust the contrast. But the problem is that auto tone made her skin look almost a little too orange. So you might drop the saturation down of that subject to better correct the skin tone or the white balance, whatever it would take to do that. All right, so just make sure your skins look like they're supposed to look. They're not too pink, they're not too red, they're not too white, they're not too orange, they look normal. So adjust vibrance and saturation until your skin tones look the way they're supposed to look. All right, that's it. That's my time, folks. Thanks, and we'll be back next week. Hopefully you ordered your new iPhones, because next week we're going to talk about taking better smartphone photos, Android or iPhone. Bye, everybody.